Today, I'm going to tell you a secret that I learned in the cannabis industry that no one is telling you. And once you hear this, you'll never look at distillate in the same way again. The cannabis industry talks about it like it's the holy grail, and you see it everywhere. It's in vapes, edibles, syringes, cartridges, infused pre-rolls, you name it. And it's always marketed as smooth and clean and pure and potent. But here's the part the industry doesn't want to say out loud. Pure doesn't mean better. In this video, I'm going to show you why distillate is the cannabis industry's dirty little secret and what you should actually be looking for if you want the best experience. Hi, I'm Tabitha Fritz. I'm a cannabis educator, consultant, and a longtime consumer who's worked behind the scenes in the industry. I train bud tenders, I work with licensed producers, and I've seen exactly how distillate is made, marketed, and sold. And the truth is, there's a massive disconnect between what the industry says about distillate and what's actually true. Now, up front, this video is not about fear. It's about empowerment. Because distillate is not necessarily bad, and it absolutely has its place. Now, I'm a pretty neutral person, and it's going to take a lot for me to say something is bad. But the way it's being positioned to consumers is kind of like the food industry calling processed white sugar a superfood. Technically, it's clean. Technically, it's pure, but it's missing the thing that actually makes the plant medicinal and interesting. So let's get into what's actually going on. What distillate actually is. Okay, here's where things get interesting. At its core, distillate is cannabis oil that has been distilled, hence the name, or refined over and over until almost everything has been stripped away except a single cannabinoid, usually THC. You could make distillate out of any cannabinoid. So you could have CBD distillate or CBG distillate, but for this video, we're going to be focusing mainly on THC distillate. Now stay with me because the next part of this unlocks the whole puzzle. Because the process literally creates a distilled form of that single cannabinoid, it's also going to remove aromas, terpenes, minor cannabinoids, and other plant compounds like flavonoids, esters, and volatile sulfur compounds that also drive effects. So what you're left with is basically a blank, flavorless, odorless base of THC. Think of it as the difference between eating a whole strawberry versus eating a spoonful of white table sugar. Now, one is really complex, right? It's got flavors, it's got nuances, it's got textures to it, and the other one is just sweet. Now, this sets up the biggest issue with distillate, the stripped down experience. And this is the part that I really want you to understand. Because most people don't realize that the reason cannabis feels so unique from person to person is because of something called the entourage effect. Now, that's the synergy between cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids and other plant molecules all working together. But distillate removes almost all of that synergy. And when you take away the natural plant chemistry, the experience becomes one-dimensional. Strong, sure, but hollow. Now, the industry knows this, so here's what they do. And this is the detail that a lot of brands hope you never ask about. They add terpenes back in. Every once in a while, you actually get cannabis-derived terpenes that come from a specific chemovar and actually contain the full blend of terpenes that were native to that specific strain. And sometimes those terpenes come from other plants. Those are called botanically derived terpenes. They come from sources like citrus fruit or pine trees or lavender or hops or black pepper or cloves. They're basically the building blocks of essential oils, and they're widely used in food and beverages and cosmetics, so they're pretty available. But more often than not, those terpenes that are added back in are formulated in a lab. Now, synthetic terpenes that are created in a lab through chemical manipulation mimic the properties of natural terpenes, right? On a molecular level, a terpene is a terpene. They're all the same. The molecular structure of the terpene isn't going to vary based on whether or not it came from a cannabis plant or an orange or it was made in a lab. And there's nothing wrong with synthetic terpenes, right? They're consistent from batch to batch. You know what you're going to get. They're cost effective, at least a lot more cost effective than most botanical terpenes, and certainly from cannabis derived terpenes. But When you're reintroducing a terpene blend to a distillate that's been stripped of all of its plant compounds, it's almost impossible to recreate the actual complexity of the original chemovar. Now, even if you do manage to perfectly recreate the original terpene blend, you're still missing the flavonoids and esters and sulfurs, all of which are going to have a significant impact on the way that cultivar is going to make you feel. So saying that distillate offers the same effects as the plant it was derived from is like spraying like a strawberry flavored body spray from Bath and Body Works onto some white sugar and pretending it's fresh fruit. Now that doesn't even take into account the issue of the minor cannabinoids. You've got CBC and CBG and the varin line of cannabinoids, THCV, CBDV. Each of these compounds is going to contribute to the mood and clarity, to inflammation relief, and the way the experience feels. Distillate wipes them all out. Now, this doesn't mean that distillate is bad. It just means that you need to understand the trade-offs. Hidden hazards and health hype. Now, let's talk about the part that still shocks people whenever I teach them about cannabis extracts. Now, distillate is often marketed as cleaner because it looks clean. Here is about, half a kilogram of distillate. Actually, I have no idea how much this is. Maybe it says 900 milliliters. Maybe it's a kilo. I'm really not sure. I got this from my husband who makes gummies with it. I asked him if he had any distillate that I could show on camera, and he procured this for me. If you're into gummies, you can follow him. He's on Instagram. His handle is Ari Makes Gummies. Now, I'm going to shine a light on this. And if you notice, this distillate is pretty crystal clear. Like you can see my hands through it, right? Now, that clarity tells consumers subconsciously that it's pure and safe. But here's the truth, and this matters more than people realize. What makes it look clean is the filtration, not the quality. Now, behind the scenes, there are still some real risks associated with any distillate that you're consuming. Risk number one is residual solvents, all right? Making distillate is a very involved process. I've gotten to watch it firsthand, and it's got a number of steps in it. So I'm going to tell you about the 5 main steps in the process so that you understand what the process is like. So the first step is extraction. So they take a bunch of dried plant matter and they pump solvents like ethanol or carbon dioxide or hydrocarbons into that plant matter over and over again, right? And that extraction process separates the dried plant matter from the crude oil that is going to contain cannabinoids and terpenes and all the other good stuff, all the other compounds in the plant. But it also contains a whole bunch of stuff you don't want, like plant matter or lipids or waxes. So we have to remove those from that crude oil. And that happens in the next step. So the next step is called winterization. And it's called that because they use very cold temperatures. They take the raw extract and then they mix it with ethanol and freeze it in temperatures that are around -40. Which, fun fact, is the same in Celsius and Fahrenheit. That's where those two temperature scales converge. Now, this makes all of the waxes and the fats and the lipids and everything that you don't want in the final product freeze into a solid, which can then be filtered out. Now we're at the third step, which is to put that winterized oil into a vacuum that gets heated up so that the ethanol or any other solvents that were used will evaporate. And then you end up with a more refined oil that doesn't contain any solvents. Now, the fourth step is to decarboxylate or decarb that oil. So you heat it up to the right temperature so that the acid forms of the cannabinoids, the THCA, the CBDA, will convert into the bioavailable forms, delta-9 THC, CBD, the bioavailable forms that your body can actually use. And then finally, in the fifth step, we have the distillation process. So you take that oil, put it in a vacuum again, which if you will remember back to your chemistry class in high school, that's going to lower the boiling point of the different compounds in the oil so that you don't have to heat it up so high, which is going to start to break it down, right? And then the temperature in the vacuum is very gradually increased because different compounds are going to vaporize at different boiling points. Now, those different compounds are called the heads, and they're collected as the process goes along. Here is a boiling point chart where you can see the different boiling points of terpenes and cannabinoids. And you can see everything pretty much has a different boiling point, right? So as the temperature is changed, you're going to get to the boiling point of different cannabinoids and terpenes. And once you get to the boiling point of whatever cannabinoid it is that you're going for, it gets collected as a pure and potent liquid. So you've got pure and potent THC at that point. Now, if there's anything left besides the cannabinoid you're going for, it's called the tails. Now, things like CBC or CBN, which have a much higher boiling point than THC, can be left in the distillate if it's not heated up high enough to remove those. Okay? Now, the reason that I'm telling you about this process is because I want you to understand that distillate requires solvents. Now, high quality processors either use carbon dioxide as the solvent because it naturally fully evaporates at the end of the process, or they make sure to purge the other solvents like ethanol properly. But low quality processors often do not do that. And residual solvents like butane or ethanol can stay in the final product if the purge step is rushed. Now, risk number 2 is heavy metals and pesticides. And I'm going to tell you about the thing that almost no one checks. If the starting plant material is contaminated, like with heavy metals or pesticides, then the distillation process can actually concentrate those contaminants instead of getting rid of them. So you end up with a pure THC oil that is also a very pure extract of a big problem. Making distillate does not magically erase poor growing practices. It just hides them. Now, a lot of brands position distillate as healthier because it looks clear or because it has fewer compounds. But fewer compounds does not automatically mean safer. Sometimes it means emptier or more processed. And in this case, clean might just be marketing, manufacturing secrets, and pricing puzzles. Now, here's the part that blows bud tenders and consumers' minds when I teach this in workshops, because the economics of this are really wild. Now, distillate is often one of the cheapest forms of cannabis extracts to make, but it's frequently sold at premium prices. Why? Because companies can fix almost anything with distillation. Old biomass that's been sitting in a warehouse for 2 years and is now too dry to consume or sell to anyone. Inconsistent flour that tests all over the place, which makes it really hard to sell. Products with low terpene content. Weird aroma profiles. Or trim that has literally been swept up off the floor after a packaging run. Or just generally unsmokable product. Distillation cleans it up and strips it down and turns it into something that companies can sell to you. And this is why distillate is the backbone of many infused products. It keeps costs low and margins high. And the consumer hears pure THC, while the producer hears, yay, we salvaged an unsellable batch. Again, it's not evil, but you deserve to know what you're paying for. Empowering your purchase. So let's talk about what to ask your bud tender or what to look for on your mail order site so that you have the power in the transaction. I'm going to give you 4 questions that will separate you from 99% of cannabis consumers. Number 1, what was the starting material for this distillate? If you can't find an answer for that, it's safe to assume that it's probably trim or old biomass or something that was otherwise unsellable. Question number 2, are the terpenes cannabis-derived or a botanical blend? Now, cannabis-derived terpenes are going to be more expensive than botanical or synthetic terpenes. So the producer will almost certainly mention it on the packaging or in the marketing materials if they're cannabis-derived. Now, a true full-spectrum distillate will usually contain the terpenes and other sensory molecules that were native to the actual plant itself. The heads are saved from the distillation process, and then they're carefully added back in, making the effects of the product a lot closer to the entourage effect of the dried bud. Question 3, what does the certificate of analysis say about residual solvents? You want to know if that distillate has been tested for ethanol or butane to make sure that it's safe to consume and doesn't have residual solvents in it. Which leads to question 4, have heavy metals been tested? Now, this should show up on the COA too. Now, one caveat with this, in some regulated marketplaces, producers are not required to test the distillate itself for heavy metals or pesticides. And the reason for that is because the plant material that was used in making the distillate was tested. In the case of the regulated Canadian market, for instance, and probably the California market, the Colorado market, other mature markets, you can assume that if something is sold on the regulated marketplace, it has likely been tested at some point along the chain for heavy metals and pesticides. And so you don't have to worry so much about that. But if the bud tender that you're asking these questions doesn't know any of the answers to these questions, that already gives you a lot of information, right? And again, this is no shade on bud tenders. I love bud tenders. Almost all of them are doing their best with very little training and little transparency from brands, right? So if a brand is doing it right, they will almost certainly let the bud tender know so that they can pass along that information to their customers. So if you learn anything from this video, let it be how to read the C of A like a pro. You want to look for solvent levels under the detection limit, right? It'll read ND for non-detect or not detected. You want to look for a clean heavy metal panel. Again, you're looking for NDs on that C of A. Look at the terpene profile if it's available. See what the terpene profile on that product is, right? If it's only 2 or 3 terpenes, it's safe to assume that the producer just created a little blend to add back in. But if you've got a wider terpene profile, then they're probably using cannabis-derived terpenes that came from a specific strain. And you also want to look for non-zero minor cannabinoids. Now, this is rarer, but it's going to tell you something about the process, right? If there are small amounts of minor cannabinoids like CBC and CBN left in the product, then you know that it wasn't made in such a way that every single head was extracted from the distillate and it was stopped at the process where it got to creating THC. You're also going to get a more robust experience from a product that has minor cannabinoids in it and is not just straight THC, like a shot to your face. Now, the takeaway from this video is that distillate is not the villain. It's one tool in your toolbox, but it is very processed. The effects are simple, and the quality depends on the integrity of the producer. And when you know the truth, you can choose distillate intentionally instead of just assuming that it's the premium option because it's labeled pure. And if you are looking for a fuller experience from your cannabis product, you can choose a vape pen or an edible or an extract or an infused pre-roll that's made with a different extraction process, something like live resin or hash rosin that are going to have the full spectrum, the full array of the other molecules in that product. Now, if you learned something today, or if you feel a little bit more empowered about your cannabis decisions, or if this blew your mind even a little bit, make sure to like the video so that more people can find it, and leave a comment with your experience on distillate. Does it hit you weird? Does it feel flat? Do you love it for edible? Some people do. Some people prefer the effects of it for edibles. And if you'd like to learn this kind of stuff about other extracts and concentrates, let me know in the comments so that I can make a video that will help to serve your purposes as well. And for more consumer empowering cannabis education that will help you level up your consumption game, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And you can also check the description of this video for my other intentional cannabis resources. So until next time, stay informed, stay intentional, and stay aware. I will see you in the next one.